So, Mel, welcome to the Toddcast. Thank you for coming in. You are actually my first non-known to me guest. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Ooh.
The first guest that I don't actually know outside of just meeting the first time. So this could anything could happen. We're flying on the seat of our pants here.
I know it's going to be wild.
It's gonna be wild. The other guests I'm really bad at preparing for things. I'm not actually. I just prepare different ways. I kind of like mind map everything like in my head, not write things down or whatever. So I've been consuming your content since we first started chatting on Instagram. And then I've just been like drafting questions that whole period of time. So
Yeah, sweet.
even today, so I haven't had anything written down. I kind of tend to operate a bit better
nice
that way.
and spontaneous. I like it. I'm pretty much the opposite. I've got everything like regimented so much in advance that it's like anally boring.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have the pairing work well.
But I identify like with people that do that, like they like a lot of the time supersede my results in a lot of things. Like I almost put it down to like almost being lazy. Like,
but we
it's just how I
cannot roll
operate.
with the punches. Like if a really random spanner hits, I'm like,
Yeah.
where you'll be like, yeah, this is my moment.
And I really like environments like that. I think like sometimes I find myself with work when things become normal. I'm like, I check out. I'm like, my catch.
You're just bored. You're asleep.
I am. I don't know if you know this movie. It's the stupidest movie ever, but Talladega Nights.
I have
with Will
seen
Ferrell.
it, but I don't remember.
It's the stupidest scene, right? But basically, I set the scene. So it's the part of the movie where it's all a big, great success. They win or do whatever they have to do. And then there's this, he's got a degenerate dad. And the degenerate dad, they're at a restaurant, like Applebee's or whatever. And then he's like, all right. He's like, it seems like everything's really perfect now. And then he just starts abusing the waitress and like walks out and like causes a ruckus in the family.
Could be self-sabotage, could be thrills.
I relate to that. When it gets too perfect, I'm out. But yeah, I try not to self-sabotage. But yeah, it's funny that we talk about that. But anyhow, one thing that I wanted to bring up, and I'm going to do it straight away, is there was a post that you put on your story today about in this decade, a millennial will turn 50. And I had a little mini freak out. I was like, what's going on there? And that's true. A millennial will turn 50 in this. Because what's the years of millennials?
So every trend agency will give you like a different age range. The specific years don't actually matter because the measure is a measure of behavior. So in general, people that are young adults and young people around the new millennium, which is where the name came from, Generation Y is another name, have certain life experiences that set them up for certain behaviors and were exposed to certain things. So like an example is Gen Alpha, the current babies, mostly babies of millennial parents. Yeah. They grew up with voice assistants in the home. Mm-hmm. The ones that are 2 years old don't realize that they're not a member of the family. And so they're going to have really different behaviors when they're older around what preferences they have in life and all that kind of thing compared to millennials as well. But a lot of people are kind of just understanding millennials, even if they are millennials themselves. Yeah. There's obviously a lot of different nuance within that. So
tell me, right, because I think from everything that I've looked at, like in terms of the generations, like there's obviously a blending of like you're a bit of a bit of category A, a bit of category B.
Absolutely.
But 1987, I was born. Yeah. So that makes me a millennial.
Yeah. But then an older millennial, depending on.
Yeah. And then what was before millennial?
Gen X.
Gen X, yeah.
So the 90s kind of young adults in the 90s, in the grunge kind of period, all the ones that are going to really remember when Kurt Cobain died, that kind of thing. They're Generation X.
See, because what kind of grinds my gears as well is that we've got X, millennial, and then there's Y, Z.
Yep.
And then Alpha.
Y and millennial are the same.
Y.
Yeah.
So that's why.
X, Y, Z, yeah.
Yeah, no, I got a mute point then because I was going to say that it annoys me because then obviously then they've gone to A.
That would be fair. It would annoy me too if that was the case.
I just didn't understand it properly. But now they've gone to A for Alpha. So we had Z and then go to A.
So I'm guessing Beta probably next. I don't know.
Yeah.
Unless something weird happens and they're all like, no.
But then I would actually be a little annoyed if I was Generation Beta and then Generation Alpha was before me. And that's a part of it, right? They're going to have a bit of a complex that they're the Alpha generation. Only because of the title, right?
I haven't actually thought about that. I like that because it's going to, A-team and all those kind of first connotations.
Because I was listening to some of the things you're talking about the generations and you dropped Generation Alpha and I never heard of it until I heard you talk about it. And then I was like, oh, that's unfair. Why do they get to be called alpha? And then I pieced it together that it's just the letters of the alphabet and it's just a word. And then I was
Someone had to come up with something.
yeah. And I'm like, oh, God. And then, so yeah, they'll probably add to their thing. Because now it's such a thing like where we have like boomers and so forth where it's kind of that category. It's becoming so much more known in these generations where that's the saying, calm down boomer or settle down boomer.
Yeah. And then for a while, Gen X got like everyone was ignoring them, and then someone on Twitter this is really recently, they took to Twitter and they were like, oh, why does everyone ignore us? Like, what about Gen X?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, oh, quieten down, Karen. And then the Karen meme and the Gen X meme combined.
Yes.
And they became a new culture. So now Gen X are Karens.
Karens, they are. They definitely are Karens.
They are.
And yeah. And yeah, it's a funny time. It is a funny time.
Gen X friends.
Yeah. Is this common of millennials to be discussing this? Because we're in that, we kind of.
Yeah. Millennials got a lot of hate for our generation. So,
we did, yeah.
Especially from the boomer generation, which are our parents, for the most part. And as a result of that, there was a bit of a complex. There's a really incredible article called Why Gen Y Are Yuppies. Obviously, this applies to the Western world, all the developing nations. And by, I think it's called Wait But Why, and he's now writing for Elon Musk after having written this article. And it looks at the way that growing up as a millennial with boomer parent influence created massive, it's really interesting. Essentially, it posits that millennials are more likely to have the kind of mental illnesses that we're hearing a lot about. And it's only one cause, but I thought it was a really interesting thought piece. Because we were told by our parents who were living in a really gentrified and affluent situation that we could achieve anything. Yeah. So we set our dreams really big. And then when we didn't achieve anything at all, we didn't all become famous overnight. Yeah. And plus social media kind of compounding that. We're a little bit disillusioned about what is actually possible to achieve and where we stack up more reasonably. Yeah, but let's be real. That's why I've got a podcast, right? Yeah, it's because I can achieve anything. Like I can do it. Like I'm going to be. And you can. Like there's two sides to that. You literally can. If you go and do the work, you can absolutely achieve. Yeah. You know? But it's also understanding what realistic expectations are within that. I think that it's kind of like that comes under the banner of entitlement, right? It's that entitlement stuff. But I think you find a huge thing, and I talk to a lot of friends and so forth about work, and they become kind of more loyal to an industry rather than loyal to a company. Where you see our boomer parents, they would work at a business for 20 years, 30 years, and they get the big package at the end when they retire and so forth. And now it's not uncommon to change jobs every 12 to 18 months. Yeah, right? Not at all. Loyalty as a concept is kind of like, obviously people can experience loyalty towards each other and that kind of thing. Yep. But in terms of traditional expectations in the workplace, that's no longer a thing. So I was doing an analysis recently, and I found, I think it was Elance, they were doing a study on the US state of freelancing. 1 in 3 Americans right now are freelancers working for themselves. And I have this theory that the reason we're seeing so many more freelancers and younger, like we're seeing kids starting businesses and things, isn't because the kids of today are particular. So I don't think that Gen Alpha and Gen Z are more creative than any other generation, because children are creative. They're more creative than adults. Yeah. I think it's that they have the tools. Now we can set up a business way more affordably than ever before. We can learn, from so many experts for free, on Coursera, books, whatever. 100%. We can learn anything. So why not start a business? And so we're seeing that more and more. And totally. Like in terms of what I've done in my career, I started off pretty early, got promoted to a level of incompetence really quickly, just because I was like a shining star. It's fun, no way to learn. Oh, 100%. I was a bit of a shining star in terms of what we did. But then when we wanted to do something major, the major hurdles was I'll give you an example, purchasing a CRM. It was like $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 to buy a CRM. And now you can get a HubSpot subscription for between $20 and $150 a month. And that's showing HubSpot moving with the new perspective of loyalty. So there was a thing today, someone was writing about loyalty in relation to the hospitality industry, and customers aren't coming back sort of anymore, and it's really hard. Yeah. And especially in that industry, it is tougher than it used to be, especially right now. But I wouldn't kind of lose hope because it's just a different game. It's not that there's no game or an unwinnable game. It's just a completely different system. And I replace, from a behavioral perspective, I replace the idea of loyalty with habit. So behavioral economists are really big on this idea of habit forming.
Yeah.
And the way I think, like a shortcut to, it's a lot of work, so it's not really that short, but the way I would recommend creating habit with your customers is you look at what you're doing, what your competitive advantage, what your customers are wanting, what is appealing to them, and look at tapping a niche with that competitive advantage. So you solve their problem in a way no one else is. You want a big enough audience that you can actually grow and your business is feasible.
Yeah.
But if you can kind of do that with a really strong brand and build as part of your competitive advantage, instead of just tweaking one part of your business, build in a system where you can continue to become more and more unique and more competitive over time.
Yeah.
It's like an economy of learning, scale, all these different things.
Yeah.
You can get to a stage where your customers are so excited and your business grows so quickly that your innovation pathway is kind of dictated for you. So when you've got the time to create something new or you've built in that time, you can keep being newer and newer and newer. And that system creates habit in your customers because they keep coming back for whatever your type of new is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a great point. I probably should introduce you a little bit better. We just got to chatting.
Excited.
Yeah, we just got chatting. You press the record button and it flows on. But you've founder of a company called Bonbo, and you're doing fantastic things from what it looks like on the outside. But it seems relatively new. Is that right? Or
Sort of.
Sort of?
So I rebranded in December. I thought that was going to happen at the 5-year mark, happened at the 2-year mark.
Okay.
The easiest way would just be to explain why that was, because it's a strategy that a lot of my customers may also choose to use, or you might find that you're even accidentally using it in your business.
Okay.
Basically, I did something called a niche entry strategy. So I had a technique, I had a niche, and I knew that what I did was valuable and what I did wasn't being done by anyone else. So that's business design, creating concepts and strategies based on creating competitive advantage for smaller businesses. I chose to focus on a niche entry strategy so that I could test how to apply my service best, which is something called a customer-centric value delivery method, which essentially just means I'm trying to work out how can I be the most helpful as possible within what I wanted. I tested it on the hospitality industry or the food industry as a whole in Australia and went, okay. And I just kept testing and testing and testing so many strategies, and I found things that didn't work. I found things that were not quite well suited for customer groups. I found one that was the most profitable thing I did during that time, but I hated doing it. It was fun, but it wasn't right for me going forward. Just a different business. And then I hit on the sweet spot. And I went, okay, this business model is feasible, it's scalable, people love it, it's the right price point. It sort of sorted out all of those things. And then I worked out, okay, what is it now about my market that I'm targeting? And it was 2 different groups. And at that point I rebranded, and that was in December, and crazy.
Cool. Your branding, your colors and everything, it definitely pops. Like I've in the lead up to this podcast, I was showing a couple of people. I was like, "Oh, this is who I'm having in."
Thank you.
And then they were like, "Oh, wow!" Like they'd look at your Instagram page or the feed, and they'll be like, "Oh, wow, that really pops."
The feedback has been good, and it's deliberate. That's what it sounds like when you hit your niche.
Yeah, but I was really curious because it's kind of like like an astrology kind of like some of the a little bit of some of the imagery is like a little bit carnival-y, like it's
esoteric.
That yeah. What tell me, where did that come from? Or obviously you did a bit of homework on there.
Yeah, absolutely. A few different things. And I kind of think with business that you're unique as long as the demand can be big enough, your unique personality and experiences and memories can kind of inform possible directions that you're positioned to see that others aren't.
Yeah.
If you can uncover them, and they're not all some oddly specific and no one is interested.
Yeah.
For me, I had identified that with the services that I was going to run, that there were two categories of people, and so they're my two target markets. One of them is, I call them the dreamers, and they might have a niche already. They have massive ideas. Usually they haven't run a business before, so they're really great at the thing they sell, but business is usually everything else. The challenge that they can have is being stuck in stuck in their ideas and not able to move forward or getting caught with the next new idea, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then I have my builders who usually come from a marketing or strategy background, may have run businesses before.
Yeah.
They can turn the crappiest idea into a wicked business, but they know the value of a good idea. And if a good idea comes in, they can really run with that.
Yeah.
It gives them all the fuel they need. The reason I was looking for a brand that could position and speak to both of those audiences, I did my own brand strategy process, but very distilled. I was looking, one, to delight people. And I knew that a brand that popped visually on Insta, and around that time, everything's very bright.
Yeah.
So I went with something a bit darker.
Yeah.
I went with a color palette that might not be seen as gender neutral, typically, and put a more gender neutral kind of spin on it, which I think is culturally very relevant. So you really want to make sure you hit your customers' cultures and what speaks to them. And there was a big interest in pattern recognition among both of those groups. So I was looking for something that spoke individually and en masse.
Yeah.
From the reason why fortune telling came into it, so I was exploring with lots of different brands, and I was exploring what's called brand archetype, which is one way, and you can kind of go out online. The resources online aren't that great at the moment. I will be eventually creating something to be better than that. But basically, an archetype in psychology, just not a brand archetype, is a sort of pattern that applies anywhere in the world, is understood by any human, to kind of express a lot of information really quickly. It's a kind of a stereotype in a sense.
Yeah.
So ideas like the lover, the mother, or the lovers, the mother, the wise wizard in the forest. These are kind of concepts that exist in all human storytelling. And as a brand, it can be really useful to leverage, especially if you're not known already, to leverage an archetype to communicate something very quickly. So emotionally, for my customers, something that was hugely important, and a brand should always be emotional because emotions speak more and quicker than thinking.
Definitely, yeah.
You think of the Disney logo compared to doing a math sum. One requires your focus. The other speaks so much to you so quickly. And the archetype I went for is one called the magician. So the magician, brands like Disney, brands like Cadbury, even Dyson, they sell transformation. They sell anything is possible. And so that emotion tapped in most strongly to what my customers were looking for. That's what attracted them. So it made sense for my brand to position in that space. I also grew up in a Druidic pagan household. So I had these symbols and kind of frameworks around me, and me being kind of partially natural spiritual and partially sort of very hyper analytical. I created my own kind of perspective growing up of what those things meant to me. Yeah. And I sort of saw fortune telling as something that was really fascinating. I personally, my perspective is not that it tells you a future you couldn't have otherwise come to on your own, but that it's a system where you're spending time really mindfully thinking about a challenge. So for example, like tarot cards is one that everyone knows. I don't see the system as a pattern you would never have come to on your own, but I think that if you never went and asked that question and looked at each of those cards as a different way of sort of analyzing a problem, that you would have never, it helps you find a pattern because you're sitting down and going, hey, instead of ruminating on this issue, I'm going to spend half an hour, whatever it might be, actually really thinking about possible ways, strategies to solve the problem. And as a strategist, I think that's why I kind of got that perspective. Yeah. So my brand kind of came from that space, a lot of trial and error as well. Yeah. But
I actually am a huge fan. And then looking back on it, the conclusion I made is, and you made a great analogy there, looking at a maths equation versus a Disney logo, my Disney logo, my conclusion that I gained from yours was basically, the fortune teller, storyteller. You're the trend girl, right?
Yeah.
So you predict the future, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you go to a fortune teller, it's the same thing. And then you have a lot of posts that are like around these, like either like the millennial one for today, for example, and they're in like a little potion or a spout, like a little bottle.
Today's
like
was the crystal ball.
Yeah,
and absolutely.
And it's kind of like that. So I was like,
The future is not unpredictable.
Yeah.
Is the sort of underlying secret message. So it's very deliberate that I use those. I'm not using them lightheartedly in that sense.
And then when you draw back to who your target audience is, that works, because those dreamers and builders, they'll kind of like really relate to that. Because then my next thought was the perception around like astrology and those sorts of things. There's a whole crowd that like, oh, that's bullshit. They just kind of just wipe it out.
And they love my brand too.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's mystery.
Yeah.
Everyone loves mystery, and it's not doing a disservice to either kind of perspective. It's just saying, hey, the future is important to you. It is something that you can work out.
Yeah.
I've got the tools to help you do that. And that's relevant to anyone in that kind of business challenge, especially my target markets.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought it was great. Like, and just that in terms of working it out, I kind of had a look at it all, and I was like, it makes sense.
We know into brand strategy.
Yeah, but so I know so many business owners, and I know so many and so forth, and they won't. No one sits down and comes up with their concept the way that you did, right? So the fastest way home for a lot of people is they'll be sitting there in front of Photoshop or Canva going, does this color look good? Or maybe that color? Or what about this font? For a small business owner, because I know some listen to the podcast, what's the best way to do what you've done the most efficiently themselves, other than hire you? Obviously, hiring you is
there's ways to do it.
Hiring you is probably the best solution. But outside of that, if the budget doesn't allow for it, or I don't know.
You're listening to a podcast. I listen to podcasts to learn shit for free. Like, I'm here to tell you shit for free.
Yeah, exactly. Well, then how do you do that? Like, even for myself, when I made the podcast, I just kind of did things that were aesthetically pleasing to my eye, and I didn't really consider a lot of those things.
And look, it's a good starting point as well. Having something, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. So have something in place, because you can always change it. If I look back to my very first business, which was in brand design, I had no mentorship. I went full time after study straight into my own business, and then learned from mentors after that. Yeah. And my branding was horrible. Like, you nearly want to be, it's nearly a good sign if you're embarrassed by your first brand, because it's a sign that you've grown and you've changed. Yeah. But if you find yourself asking those questions, what is right, or is this right? That means that there's a challenge in your strategy. So for a second, I would scrap the design, because the design is an execution of a strategy, and come back to a center point. So I usually like to start with what you're actually trying to achieve, kind of putting all your pieces of the puzzle out. So some of the pieces are around you and your skill sets and what you want. Mm-hmm. Some of the pieces are around ways that you might create a business model for a customer. And there's something called like a business model canvas. I don't use this in my strategy, but if you've never done a business model before, it's a great starting point. Yeah. You can literally download it for free online, Business Model Canvas by Strategizer. And it shows you how all the pieces of a business puzzle fit together. Mm-hmm. And then you want to try and understand who buys this as much as you can. And there's an empathy mapping technique you can also download for free, or you can just DM me. I can send you the version I use, which is there's a little bit extra in there. Yeah. And basically, by learning your customers and learning the pieces and learning yourself, you can kind of go, okay, so I see strategy as placing a bet. So it's not that you can't change your strategy, but you don't want to have lots of strategies. You want to have one, especially if you're unsure going forward. And asking those questions, is this right, means you don't know what is right. A clear strategy means those answers are really easy. Mm-hmm. So when you have, your business model canvas kind of laid out, your customers, it kind of gets a little bit easier to say, hey, this is the right brand for my customer. You can have a look at brand archetypes, that kind of thing that we were speaking about before, and sort of see which bet will I start placing first, so that I can get some money in the door and start finding out stuff. And part of that bet, you want to go, okay, how will I know that it's working? So you don't want to just place the bet. You want to know a signal that bet has been effective, or that it has been a failure, to go and change your bet. And so failing is not bad. Failing is part of business. Like, literally my first 2 years, my plan was to fail as much as I could until I worked stuff out. And people don't care. Like, if someone really cared, you don't want them as a customer because they
yeah.
don't get it at all, you know. And so when you've kind of placed those bets, say for example, you were like, give me a crazy random business.
A crazy random business.
Yeah. We'll do a little mini
shoe shining.
Okay, shoe shining. So you're a shoe shining.
Why did I think of that?
No, I love it. So you're a shoe shining business.
Yeah.
You've decided that the people that need shoe shining most are people going into job interviews,
Yeah.
right? So
I think probably like a real gentrified audience, someone who wears leather shoes often.
yeah.
City crowd.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of
So
that's what I'm thinking.
we'll go with we've got our city crowd, and so they're probably corporates, right?
Corporate, yeah.
So we start trying to understand. So an empathy mapping process is about getting in that corporate brain as much as possible.
Yeah.
Where do shoes fit into their day? Or they take them from A to B, or
Yeah.
you know, it's annoying when they're not shiny enough because I don't look the part.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe from that uncovering process, so that's where the empathy mapping is really good. We discover, because you always discover new things using this process.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we discover that lawyers care about the shininess of their shoes more than anyone else.
Yeah.
Because the brand, you know, if a lawyer rocked up in a shitty car, that's really problematic. Whereas if your banker rocked up in a shitty car, it doesn't matter so much because there's a industry brand kind of there. And so we're getting some clues. Then we look back and kind of go back and forth. We look at our business kind of model and we go, okay, so there's so many ways that we could sell. We could, sell to the lawyer group.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm, really good at, I really care about the specific combination of the oil and the leather that I put together. And maybe there's something you have there that's really important. So you keep that ingredient because that's you. If you don't like your strategy, you're not going to run with it.
Yeah.
It's plays out a little bit different if you're a bigger organization in this part. But you start looking, what are all the different ways I can make cash? And very, very briefly, this is even quicker maybe than the business model canvas. There's kind of two rough systems where all business kind of models might fall into. One of them is it's free for the customer. So they get their shoes shined for free, but somebody else pays the bills. So maybe there's advertising involved. You have to stare at ads while you get your shoes shined, whatever it is.
It's not bad.
Yeah. So random business model coming out right now.
This down. Yeah.
And then the other kind of side, so there's many different ways third parties can pay the bills. I create new ones all the time. But the other side of it is that the customer pays, in which case you have to give them a value proposition.
Yeah.
So say we choose that. Most businesses tend to fall into that. And the brand forms, therefore, one of the most important functions because it communicates the value.
Yeah. So
with our shoe shining business to lawyers in Melbourne City, for example, where how about of the following three, which ones do you think should be our shoe shining business? One of them is that they deliver value. They're always doing it in the newest way. So there's always a new oil and a new combination.
Yeah.
One of them is that they do it the fastest.
Yeah.
So it's every time it's exactly the same as it was last time. It's fast, it's reliable, it's relatively affordable.
Yeah.
And then the other is that it's the most helpful. So we come to you.
Yeah.
Could be. What are those sort of three roughly?
I'm going to go with our target audience. They're busy. They're getting to meetings. I'm going to go with fast, efficient, bang. It's really effective.
Boom.
Same every time. And it's I've got Daniel on the corner. I know he's going to look after me. Bang.
Yeah. And that's great. It's great that you say that as well, because that shows you how the business model, the structure, it's not even the brand, it's not even what you're selling, it's not who you're selling it to, but the way that you sell it also affects it. And business model is laying each of these things on top of each other.
Yeah.
So that's what's called an operational excellence value discipline. I think the world leader or one of the world leaders in this space is Domino's. They know how to get the exact same product anywhere in the world to you. You can order the same pizza from, Malaysia as you can from London, and it's the same every single time, and it's fast every single time.
The funny thing about that is that Domino's actually sucks, but it's the devil you know.
Yeah, it's consistent. You know what you're going to get. So if you choose it, and it also shows with these expectations, even outside of brand, if you didn't get what you expected, you would be really pissed off because that's the fundamental promise. Whereas if it was something, if you expected a really good pizza, then you just didn't get the brand. And so it shows you that there's different ways that businesses can interact with customer expectations as well. And knowing your customers and knowing what you're selling is crucial there.
Yeah.
But essentially when you get all of those pieces together, you can then say, hey, well, I'm going to be the fastest shoe shiner for lawyers. You know, and that on its own could be a wicked business model. But now we want to go, well, what's the brand? What's the magic that ties that all together? So say we picked the maybe the brand archetype of, I'm trying to think of one that might, maybe the brand archetype of the rebel. So the reason I picked the rebel or the outlaw brand archetype is that lawyers are there to win, and they're there to win verbally at any cost. And they have a great ability to problem solve and to stretch the law. And so I can imagine that personality. So I actually know the personality type nickname, the lawyer, which is called the ENTP in the Myers-Briggs. But essentially, they love verbal sparring. They'd love to, even if they're a mate of yours, they might oppose your opinion, not because they actually oppose it, but just for the fun of actually having the play and having that discussion.
Definitely.
So a rebel brand could be really appealing there.
Okay.
And so you want to see, how does this brand fit with the business model? How does it fit with what I like? How does it fit with the customer? And you can kind of see a little bit how a brand is built and how you can build it as well. Like just pause this and follow along.
So do some little study on archetypes. I was thinking like sort of more like this new age barbershop style, like that kind of prestige around that. But I don't know what the archetype associated with that would be.
There can be a couple. So one could be like the Patagonia of shoe shining, which is the explorer. So you go off into the unknown. One could be there's a few ways that a vintage brand can tie in, because you can have an old version of a lot of things. So barbershop on its own doesn't have a strong archetype, and so they're probably playing mostly off nostalgia. Nostalgia on its own is probably mother archetype, so nourishing. So we're looking after you so you can go about your day. We're going to do what's right for you, even if you don't like it. That can be a little bit of a conflict with operational excellence as well, because when you want it quickly, maybe you want it your way as well, and you're dealing with that lawyer personality. But that would just be it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you want to make sure you acknowledge that obstacle in your process. But
well, what you were saying there about the archetype of a barbershop, that makes so much sense, because I go to King's Domain. Shout out King's Domain. I go to King's Domain, and it's like the whole, even that title in itself. One, because it's close to the Domain Gardens, and they started in South Yarra. But two, it's like it's a place for kings. It's where you go to that nourishing, like
Place for Kings is a hero brand. Sorry, not a hero brand. I was wrong. A ruler brand. Yeah. So they're the Queen of Hearts of brands,
and it's very clean. Well. Like it's very clean and so forth. But it's that the relationship I have with my barber is almost that. It's like, it may not be the way that you want it, but it's the right way. Like that, you were saying, and definitely
he's looking after you. And also your brand then can go back. So all of these things, there's an interplay between them, and the more you know about that interplay, the better. Yeah. So if you're running, a mother or a caregiver is the name of the archetype. A caregiver archetype doesn't have to be feminine at all. You can let that brand touch every other part of your business. So an example might be that when you come in, there's a beer right away, because you're being looked after. You're being, your mum's always making sure that you're well fed. How can we bring caregiver into every single little thing we do? Because that's your brand persuading your customers. And people often say, I keep hearing this more and more and more, that like, listen to your customers, and it's nearly so customer centric that every business is moving towards the same point, which is really boring. I think brands bring a fun tension that's important as well. So I don't think you should put all your eggs in the customer basket or in the brand basket. Have a little bit of everything.
It's funny you say that, because some of my favorite places to go, the customer service is almost crap, but the experience is amazing.
You see that a lot with businesses like Apple. So they deliver their value. Many of them. I mean, a rebel business doesn't. I don't give a fuck. You get treated poorly, but like there's this dumpling place I go to, and I love being treated badly. They're nearly part of the experience, and it's because I come there for an affordable product that's the same every time. So actually that's operational excellence. That's not the Apple. Yeah. And because I come there every single time for that same experience, I don't care. In fact, I would nearly be disappointed that I didn't have the same experience of being treated poorly. Yeah. But the other side is with a brand like Apple, what you're paying for is, so their promise is new every single time they release, especially a new type of product, a new category of product,
Correct,
their promise is that it'll be a game changer. So iPhone changed communication, iPad brought laptops in a really portable context, iPod, same deal. You get the pattern.
Down, yeah.
That's their value delivery pattern. So just one aspect of their competitive advantage. And because their promise is about newness, you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of the other two. So you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of helpfulness and a bit of operational excellence if you're getting really good newness. And the brand, the people that they're attracting to that brand are willing to make that sacrifice more than other people as well.
Yeah. The problem with that, when that happens, the brands, their planned obsolescence, and Apple's a key one for it. But I continue to buy, and I turn over my phone about every 12 months. I'm in that cycle. I'm right in their cycle. But I've noticed that on that 12-month point, the speaker is worse. It's not as loud.
They actually got done for that recently.
In France? Yeah. Was it in France?
It was everywhere. They were inbuilding in their hardware update or their software updates, which they force you to get after all. If you keep ignoring the software update, you eventually have to get it.
Yeah.
Things to drain the battery on purpose. They got done for it, so hopefully they won't do it anymore. But in businesses like that, where there's a monopoly or a cartel, so an oligopoly. So oligopolies are like maybe there's 8 or 4 in a business, that kind of thing. They're competitively inclined to engage in cartel behavior, which is price rigging, all that kind of stuff. You see that on Instagram with bigger brand accounts. They'll do engagement pods where 8 big brand accounts will join, whatever it is. They'll join a group and they'll literally like all each other's posts, and algorithmically, because they're all big brands, it just keeps them on Explore and all of us smaller brands not on Explore.
Yeah. We just need to collaborate a bit better.
Yeah. But there is a way, and I work with niche brands. All of my customers either are niches, or they're becoming a niche with me, or they're releasing a niche product if they're a larger brand. And a niche gives you what's called a micro monopoly advantage. When you're the only one that does what you do, you can set your own prices. You can I don't encourage you to be unscrupulous towards your customers, because that will get you in other ways. Trust and transparency are really, really important values, and are more and more important in younger generations as well.
Yes.
But if you if you want that flexibility of setting your own lifestyle, a niche is a great way to do that as well, because you can have all those advantages of being a monopoly. And by the time that people have realized that what you're doing is really good, they either didn't get you to start with, or they ignored you because you were so niche. But then when you grew, they're like, oh, there's something in that. And by that point, especially if you've got a really strong business structure and competitive advantage that's multifaceted, you've built an economy of learning where people can't copy you. So if an ad agency went, oh, I actually want to go and get tiered customers, one, they can't afford to do it. So internally they need 5 to 6 people to replace me.
Yeah.
That's deliberate.
Yeah.
And I found a way to do that. If a smaller business wants to do it, they can't capture my amount of learning that I've done over, my massive career. So you deliberately start building in these layers that when people get to your point, they're forced to ideally differentiate. If they copy you, they'll fail. So they have to go another way, and that's fine. There's, for example, if you want to be a business designer in a different space, there is so much work. This is a massively untapped niche. If you're interested in this kind of thing, you can absolutely go and do it. And you can find your own space where you're that guy, and I'm this guy, and there's a few other guys. Yeah. And that's actually really good for all of us, because we get something called, I forget the name for it, but essentially we all attract additional demand to our industry, which increases the size of our industry overall, and it increases resources coming into the industry. So it's actually a good thing to be in a trend.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that we mentioned earlier, and it was another post that you did recently, it was about the Myers-Briggs, and you kind of had the little boxes with each about the potatoes.
Oh, yeah.
About the potatoes. Yeah. And I'm an ENFP.
Yeah.
And my potato was like, let me buy you a round of drinks or a cocktail,
martini on me.
Yeah, martini on me. And I read that and I was like, yep, that's me. Because my first time doing a Myers-Briggs, I was like, oh, wow, this is so fascinating. I went through it all, the 16 personalities. I actually did that test, went through it all, and I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And then I was like, surely there's some flaw in it somewhere.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
So all of these, the very first quote that underpins all of my thinking on it is from an old statistician, I don't think he's alive anymore, called George Box.
Yeah.
And his quote is, all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Yeah.
So any system, my own methodology,
So true.
it's not an objective truth. It's just a person thinking about a system a lot and trying to come up with a way to communicate it to other people, to understand it, to replicate it. And when the advantage of having a system is that you can replicate it and you can do it again and again, but the challenge that comes with it is that it's not able to be tailored for everyone, which is funny when it comes to personality, because isn't the point of it to be tailored, but it's only tailored up to 16 variables. And it, unlike other personality tests, it only looks, and even like other personality tests, it only looks at a few aspects of personality. So it's not pigeonholing your whole identity.
Yeah.
If yours doesn't sound quite like you in the aspects that it is talking about, which is usually about relating to work environments, which is why I use it in what I do, because it's very relevant, helps me just navigate. There's so many strategies I can bring up, but it helps me bring up the ones first that are perhaps a bit more likely to be relevant to that person. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't quite sound like you, I would keep looking. But within that, it's only looking at one aspect of your personality, so.
But what makes me believe it so much is that I read so many things of the traits of what an ENFP is, who are other ENFPs and so forth. And I'm like, that's me. I'm like, damn, you got me.
The world. You're first. So there's something in like this type of personality theory. So everything I use, I've like studied really extensively.
Yeah.
Which is just partially my own personality.
Yeah.
But your very first decision-making step is essentially, they call it extroverted intuition, but it's not intuition with what you first associate with that word. It actually means pattern recognition. So the mind map, you've got a mind map in your head that's just kind of lighting up
100%.
Immediately.
Yep.
And then right after that you go, okay, and this is all happening quickly when you're making decisions, but you then think, okay, how do I feel about these patterns? Yeah. And then there's many steps, but those two steps will guide a lot of your behavior, and it'll explain where you find challenge, but also where you'll really flourish. And I was thinking before, definitely with a P, we were chatting about flexibility versus rigidity. So I'm a extreme on the J side, and I imagine you're quite on the P side. And that enables you to be spontaneous, and there's no good or bad personality type. There's no good or bad letters. Definitely. It's just different, and that's what makes the word fun. Yeah,
it's funny that you mentioned that about my brain lighting up and making those intuition calls.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yeah, but the problem with it is that I find it hard to say I do it a lot with people when I meet people. I'll write them off pretty quickly. And then I find it hard, and it is only based on previous experience. And then I find it hard to rewrite those. And that person has done absolutely nothing wrong to me. They've been fantastic. They've actually been really kind or courteous or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's just something that I've just gone, oh.
Little red flags come up.
Yeah, and then I find it hard to rewrite that. It actually takes a long time for me to then warm to that person. It doesn't happen often. Because I again,
ENFP is one of the most warm personalities. So.
Yeah, being an ENFP, I love everybody as well.
Which is probably why you have this. You notice this because it's out of sync with your loving of everybody.
Yeah, and then so when I do make that call, and look, I will say majority of the time I'm right. That particular person in the end, in the long run, is.
And that's the feeling meets pattern recognition. Kind of together a little bit, is that it allows you to see. Red flags, and red flags on its own, it's just a flag. It's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. It's when you get a lot of red flags, or a red flag that right in your guts is just, and that's why they use the word intuition for this type of pattern recognition, but pattern recognition is a more accurate term. Your gut, sometimes when you really, really, really know, you're correct, and it's just a matter of finding out. So it doesn't mean you have to, I like to use something called Bayesian logic when I'm making decisions like a robot. But essentially you can have different perspectives of people, but until evidence overwhelmingly puts them in one basket or another, which often it doesn't, so often you just have to be uncomfortable with the uncertainty. It's just part of life. But until that happens, as long as you're open to the other possibilities, it's okay to be wary. Mm-hmm. It's the difference is if you're actually actively being hostile to someone that hasn't done anything wrong, there's no reason you can't protect yourself. There's no reason you can't maintain a distance. Yeah. We don't have to love everybody to the same degree. But,
I tend to shut off and just distance.
Yeah. It's just which is a healthy thing. It's a boundary.
Yeah, it's just the easiest way. As soon as I get that vibe on someone, But then what's so annoying is that it's obvious because I'm so up all the time. And then I've decided on a particular something. Yeah, like the other people around, they'll be like, "Hey, well, what's going on?" And I'm like, "Oh, nothing."
Yeah,
but they know, like it's
But like it's not a bad thing to struggle with. Not wanting to be honest to people and people being able to see your face and how you communicate. It's just finding a way to express that's honest enough that allows you to have that boundary. Like you don't owe it to anyone to have to be lovely to everyone all the time. You can change your mind at any time you
100%,
want. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with changing your mind or changing your idea. I definitely am a fan of that. That's absolutely fantastic. Now, getting back to generational stuff, because this is, I feel...
I should mention really quickly, I'm not a psychologist. I've worked with commercial psychologists.
Yes.
It's behavioral science is one of the 4 pillars of my methodology. If projects come up where behavioral science is really, really important, I can pass you on to amazing behavioral scientists. You have those tools. But yeah, mine's commercial application and massive enthusiasm, just so you know.
No one's going to take you to task on everything that you've said on here, but definitely.
It's important to know.
Thanks for the disclaimer. But you have those tools, and I think it's really important to have a lot of those tools. But getting back to the generations, because the content that I've consumed from you or the interviews you've been in, there's 2 things that I put you in these categories, right? The trend girl and the generation girl. I was like, a lot about trends, you know a lot about generation, and obviously they interact, right?
Yeah.
So we mentioned earlier about the current generation and the 2-year-old children in the house being programmed to things like the Alexa and Google Home and so forth. And when you said that earlier on, there was like when
they don't understand that it's not a family member. It's partially because I think the term is object permanence. Just 2-year-olds don't actually understand that their parents can't hear their thoughts. So have you ever had a little kid look at you and go, and then like get upset or react in an unexpected way? They think you know what's happening in their mind at the same time, especially if you're their parent or a teacher.
Yeah.
But because of that, it's not that they necessarily will be overly trusting or something. It's just that they're not at an age where they can tell the difference between a pet, a sibling, and this might be incorrect science, but roughly is the explanation for that trend. Yeah. Signal.
Yeah, when you mentioned it earlier, the first thing that popped into my mind was, because we were talking about the generations, was that they're obviously going to be the best target to introduce full AI and automation on, because they trust it already, like in the smallest way possible. Like
the role of like AI is already kind of around there. Driverless cars are already being tested on Victorian roads, like fully driverless cars.
Yeah.
AI. So I have maybe a slightly different perspective than tenants in the industry. Basically, I'm not scared of AI. I don't. Then maybe I become wrong, but I feel like I probably won't. The good intuition, pattern recognition. Over and over again, artificial intelligence has been proven to be really poor at being creative, because we've been trialing all these kind of things. It's been an open innovation field, and what we've noticed is it's starting to plateau in the rate of innovation we're seeing related to creativity compared to artificial intelligence doing things like automating repetitive tasks. So if you're in a company already, innovation directors around the world, and I'm exposed to a lot of the information that innovators are, because part of the trend job or the trend aspect of my work, already being told, with considering artificial intelligence in your business, consider where it fits, which makes sense. And where it fits is in a repeatable kind of way. And so whilst the intelligence aspect of it making choices for us involves ethical complications, so for example, with driverless cars, one of the challenges is things like, if this car has to hit a old person or a baby and there's no choice, which one does it hit? So they're really complicated ethical quandaries that are really being brought up and trying to find kind of solutions for. So AI is not the best to find the solution for that quandary, but it's the best to, once it's all plugged in, to deliver it.
Yeah.
But what it does mean is considering how you feel about something called soft paternalism. So soft paternalism is where politically or ethically or morally, are you okay with someone making choices for somebody else? And some of us are going to be okay with that. Some of us are not, to differing degrees. So one extreme end is ultimate libertarianism, which is we should make our own rules, there should be no laws, etc. It's really common to see libertarians on like the dark web, like Tor, and doing a lot of dodgy things as well. Not to say that libertarians are dodgy, but to say that there are pros and cons to all models are wrong and some are useful. There's pros and cons to each of the systems. The other is ultimate rigor and structure, and we're seeing that kind of system coming out of China, that kind of thing, where people are being rated on how good they are as a citizen, and that's allowing them or disallowing them things like flying to another country and various rights,
places in a queue, etc.
Yeah. And so there's massive extremes there. Soft paternalism sits somewhere in the middle, and it's my personal perspective. And a lot of people that have studied behavioral economics have this idea as well. And basically, while some of the people that make choices aren't going to be making them in your interests, many of them are. So, for example, every behavioral economist I've ever worked with loves people, and they just want to try and go, how can I make the world a better place for people? Yeah. Some of the behavioral economists out there are going, I'm going to make sure people are automatically subscribing to newsletters by setting that default. So that's something that a choice architect, which is the name of a behavioral economist, applying their work to creating landscapes of choice or creating certain decision-making pathways. That's the name of their sort of job role. But yeah, that's that idea of soft paternalism is really a lot of the question I think that underlies that, because I'm okay with soft paternalism. I'm okay with the risks of some of the things people choosing being bad and some of them, being good. So there will be failures and successes. I like that mix more than either of those other two extremes.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. But one of the things that scares me the most, if we look at like the AI, the scary factor of robots like taking our jobs, is it's actually quite scary, because if I look at the technology advances since I was like under 10, and then in my teens, and then in my 20s, and then now in my 30s, things have rapidly moved, and I don't think it's not going to be much longer. Like, I was really surprised at this, like the Alexa, Amazon Alexa. My housemate, he's a millennial, he's a Gen Y, but he's very old. He's an old soul. He's old.
So he might have more behaviours of a Gen X.
Yeah,
a boomer.
And even I'd even put him in some boomer traits, and I love him to death. But I was really surprised he came home with an Alexa. He brought, like, they're on special, he brought two. And
that's interesting.
He's not a tech guy. He's not a tech guy at all. And then he is like, oh, I've got this Alexa. But he was in the States for a period of time with some friends, and one of the people that he stayed with happened to work for Amazon, and they had the Alexa there, and he obviously seen it, used it. But for someone to buy tech, he's not the guy that I would put down. And then when
did he explain?
Well,
was he curious himself?
He liked it because he obviously saw it in action, but then now it's there, and he uses it a lot, and it's surprising.
Really handy. Like, they're definitely they've already gotten done for listening when they said that they weren't, but no one individually. There's no like, as far like this is, I don't officially know, but I don't think there's someone listening to your conversation in general. I think it's an AI is listening to sets of conversations. So at the most, if your conversation is really weird, like it's an anomaly, maybe that's when a human would listen to it. All of this is not allowed, but I think once things have been found by big tech giants to be happening, we can kind of assume that they probably maybe still happening.
But I'm really interested in the trust factor and how people are going, okay, I'm comfortable with this, and then where those steps are. Because what I can see, especially with a lot of things with like transportation and so forth, like if we have driverless cars, well, does there need to be a driver? Does there, the transport industry, like if we're sending trucks, like especially in a place like Australia, like with train, like especially something like a train where it runs on a track, like why does there have to be a driver if we can build in an AI like that?
Well, the kind of assumption is that there won't be drivers in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there is, so it's with driverless cars specifically, it's good to understand that it's a spectrum. So there's degrees of driverless cars. I think that if you look into like the Australian testing on driverless cars in Victoria, most of them are being done. But there's fully automated, and then there's like degrees of automation. Yeah. So like, I think there was an ad at one of the Super Bowl ads was around like a car that will park itself. Yeah. But you do everything else. So how these get delivered, an idea can come out where people aren't ready for it. So Google Glass is a good example there, where people were like, oh, I'm not ready to wear glasses. The tech is already there, but people aren't comfortable with it. At the end of the day, no matter how many perfect persuasion techniques you put in, like literally, if I had all the 4 parts of my methodology working perfectly, if you don't want to do something, you cannot be made to do it.
Yeah.
In fact, you're more likely to become incensed and it's called disconfirmation bias, become more fervent in your opposing belief when presented with that information. So in general, I wouldn't be too personally wouldn't be too fearful, but understand that different things are possible, and constantly being informed is important, and kind of decide for yourself, what am I comfortable with letting happen? So for me, because I value curiosity and discovering new things, I tend to be open with taking more risks in the space of information. I'm happy to give away more information to kind of look what's under the hood. That might not work for you. You might be like, you know what, I'd rather something wasn't listening into my house if the only benefit I get is knowing what the weather is and getting to set an alarm and turn my lights off.
It's interesting. But because the amount of information that's mined, like even with what I do and some of our forms of advertising, the way that we mine data and generate leads and so forth, and then what you can learn from that and build lookalike audiences from that and so forth. I just wonder so many times, like when I'm behind the curtain and I'm seeing all these techniques and I'm only at a certain level, and then I'm like, oh, what does Google know? What does the next
I do
level
trend
up know?
analysis on Google. You can do it as well. Google Trends, really interesting if you've ever played on there. Even better if you're playing on there as a trend analyst. But with behavior in general, it is really, really, really boring and time consuming and basically irrelevant and vacuous to look at all of this data one by one. The data is interesting en masse. So I did a study. I've been doing a few different studies. One of them was around, this was in 2017, or the end of it. Every country in the world, including like in any language, what the most popular food recipe was being searched for, and finding that in each country, and that had meaningful search results. And there was no relevance in looking at each individual person, because what I wanted was to see what people are doing en masse. And it's kind of, I don't know if this is a terrible explanation, but it's actually my favorite analogy, is nuclear decay. So basically, in a half-life of something that's radioactive, half of it is gone. You cannot know which half, but you can know that half of it will be gone. And I kind of see trends as being a measure of culture, and each person has their own stack of all of their unique cultures that they're a part of. Maybe, your roommate has some boomer cultures as well as millennial cultures, that kind of thing. And looking at the particular culture of interest, it's not actually relevant to look at the individual, because when you're marketing to a mass group, an individual person might not be interested, but en masse you can know that if roughly you do this all the time, 70% of those people will respond, and you can optimize that 70%. But in general, at the individual level, I don't know that matters, especially when it comes to being, I guess, worried by the results that you're kind of seeing. But for me, I found some fun things looking en masse that I found more useful than if I was looking at an individual behavior, because I can extrapolate that and apply that to other things. And as a trend analysis, I want to apply culture. Applied culture is kind of how I see trends. I found that in around 3 o'clock, this led to another study of looking at food in a different way, because I was focusing on the food niche at the start. Around 3:30ish every day, and around 7 to 9ish every day, people are looking at cheese. They're engaging with cheese-related content on search, and at around 5:30 every day, they're engaging. Chocolate-related searching, and around 5:30ish every day, they're engaging with cheese-related content. That's interesting. We can do something with that, because it's not the same people every day looking at cheese. It's not like there's probably one person out there, the anomaly, that is literally looking at cheese every day. But most of us just tend to engage with cheese content at that time, or chocolate content at that time. That's useful. And so I kind of see it in that kind of way of application.
Speaking of cheese, one of the things that fascinated me a lot was you said that you accurately predicted the cheese and pasta. No, was it
Oh,
cheese
yeah.
and mac and cheese? Mac and cheese. Yeah.
There's been so many. One of the like frustrations, I guess, that led me to not only developing my model, but creating the particular business that I had is I get lots of business ideas because I can see that they are going to be a thing.
Yeah.
And it was really frustrating me when I'd predict something and then it would happen. I'd be like, oh, that could have been my business. And I don't actually, it's not my personality to actually go and run each of the businesses, which is why I found this consulting niche. But in general, there is actually a really easy way to map techniques that I call, I don't know if they're in major trend agencies, they actually do something else.
Yeah.
But I call it credible collisions. There's many ways to map techniques, but this is one that is relevant to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So essentially, say cheese and pasta in Melbourne were they were always popular. They go together well.
Yeah.
And at the same kind of time, they started accelerating. And so I was like, we're going to see cheese and pasta related things.
Yeah.
And this happens with, you can track any trends where they're connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
They're reasonably, each of the trend, one's not an overnight trend. They're both going to continue and they're moving towards each other. And you can discover, like I've discovered so many trends before they really became a thing because I was like, oh, I think that's going to be a thing because these trends are kind of coming together. But how the trend plays out depends on culture as well. So on a really, really mass level, it was just cheese. It was cheese and pasta. But no one was talking about that because they were talking about what was more relevant to them individually, the individual culture. So I saw and predicted, one I didn't predict, two of them I did. I knew that mac and cheese was going to get really popular in restaurants because it's kind of putting spins on it, the old kind of nostalgic favorite taps very well into restaurant culture and eating out culture. We want something that we could make at home, but better than we would make it at home. That's what the mac and cheese trend is, largely. Then carbonara was the other one I predicted on food delivery because on food delivery, whatever attracts you to the menu, at the end of the day, people end up, margarita is the most commonly ordered pizza. Weird thing. Jen, this is on a Menulog State of the Industry report. Great quick tangent.
Here we go.
Gen X.
Yeah.
Order their food delivery predominantly from the toilet. Well, I take that as I take the smallest room in the house to meet in the toilet.
Oh, okay.
Unusual.
Hang on,
Millennials from the living room.
Let's go back a little bit. How are they getting that data? Like just through...
I'm not sure how they got that specific
that freaks me
insight
out.
because nothing else was on that page was like that. But in general, it would be potentially survey data, so self-reporting, so I don't know how accurate. Yeah. Some of it was definitely survey data. Others would be aggregating data from the app itself. So app would have location, but it wouldn't have location within the home. You would only have like that, if you zoom in on Google Maps, it's roughly that level of info. So probably survey data, I'm going to guess.
If I order Uber Eats, it's generally laying on my bed or sitting on the couch. Like
if I'm
that's
food common
delivery,
millennial. This is where I order my Uber Eats.
If I'm doing that, it's never like standing up in the kitchen, where it probably should be associated with. But I would be cooking, wouldn't I, if I was to do that? So it makes sense that
You're
I'm
not
sitting
in
on
the kitchen.
I'm lounging. So that makes sense.
But carbonara really popular in food delivery, and that makes sense. Cheese, pasta, home.
Yeah.
We want to eat something comforting.
Definitely.
Usually when you get to Uber Eats, it's later in the day, and same reason as we're looking at cheese and chocolate late at night is we experience something called ego depletion. So basically we have roughly a set amount of willpower each day, as long as we've had a good night's sleep and all other things
factors,
equal. And then over the day, the more decisions we make and the more stress we have, the quicker that runs out. And that's why we have like retail therapy. It's why you're much more likely to buy chocolate at night. 7-Elevens and things know this when they position their store on which side of the train station. They'll be more likely to have chocolates and things near the counter. They have chocolates near all of the counter, but they're more likely to have chocolate in
outbound
eye-catching spots and posters and things. Whereas if you're going in the morning and your 7-Elevens on that side, which is probably less likely to be honest, it's more likely to focus on like bananas and up and goes and things that you're more likely to, health signals you're more likely to respond to in the morning, or like iced coffees even. But during the day we lose that willpower, and so making less decisions is a way to help reserve your willpower as well. So if you want to like kick a habit, this is me like going way out of my I guess jurisdiction, but if you wanted to kick a habit that you were really struggling with if at the same time you are making less decisions in your day in general and less stressed in your day in general, you're more likely to have success as well.
Yeah. So it's funny also as well, like what I love about chatting with you and so far, and also
It's been fun.
consuming. Yeah, it's been fun. And consuming your content, what I love most about it is that you're consciously competent in these areas, right? And then I see so many people that are like trendy, and they're not consciously competent at that. And I guess they kind of land with these in experience. And one person I know that is super, super trendy. He's like up with all the latest stuff. He's generally like before it's cool. Like, and he
Early
like,
adopter.
yeah, he's an early adopter. He was a
trend
hipster before there was hipsters. He was this before there was that. And like at the moment he's kind of like a real, like a minimal.
They're great for trend hunting though, because we call them cool hunters or like category buyers, that kind of thing. They tend to be around in the niches they subscribe to culturally. They tend to experience things first.
Yeah, and I asked. I it was one night we were over refreshed, too many cordials, and we're up late. And I said to him, "Look, man, I think you're so cool. I think you're awesome. How do you do it? Like, what is it?" And then he kind of brushed off. He didn't know, obviously, but he did give me one rule, and I looked at this rule over a period of time, and it works on so many levels. He said, "It's the 18 years." He said every 18 years. Something will repeat itself or something will be similar. And then I look back to there's the age old saying, history repeats.
Well, the cultures that he's interested in, they have that life cycle.
Definitely.
Possibly.
Yeah. And then I look at like, and one at that time, and this was really interesting. He's like, we were sitting at the table or whatever, and he goes, "Do you know what's going to be the next big thing?" And I was like, "What?" He's like, Ray-Ban Wayfarers or Wayfarers. I always say that word wrong.
And he was right.
Wayfarer, or whatever it is, right? And then he told me that, and he goes, "Do you know what they are?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know what they are." And he showed me the classic photo of Bob Dylan, like Dylan wore them all the time. And then I was like, "Oh, okay." And then like you betcha, within 12 months, you know how they just boomed all of a sudden.
Yeah. He knew it was coming because he could see the trends colliding. So that particular thing I was talking about before, people close to innovation have a sense for that type of pattern recognition. So they tend to get it correct. And that's why trend, one of the trend sources for major trend firms is actually cool people from around the world.
Yeah. And then he told me this 18-year rule, and then I'm like, all right, cool. So I always like every now and then, like it's 2020 now, so I'll Google 2002. All
models are wrong.
Yeah. So I'll Google, and he's like pretty close always. And I look at the young who's graduating high school now, like year 10 to year 12.
What generation?
Yeah, who are they?
Gen Z.
Gen Z, right? Gen Z have this esche or lad culture and whatever, but then you look at their fashion sense, and it's almost like a repeat of the casual culture of like the football hooligan casual culture, but then they repeated the tennis gear. So they were wearing like,
there's like this 90s 70s combo.
Yeah.
Kind of coming in.
But it's coming back, right? So it's almost fits in with that. Like, and then I kind of looked at it even further to his model, and I was like, all right, so 18. And then I looked at 36 because it's like the next number divisible 18. And then there was still things carrying over. And then then we look at that, like you just said, the 70s, 90s
So maybe for fashion, which is what's connecting a lot of this particular type of cool and dominant zeitgeist. So what fashion is popular in pop, literally pop culture. So popular for pop. Perhaps, it has that kind of rhythm, but it would have other layers and things kind of as well. So not everything is going to have that 18 years, but
definitely, absolutely. But it's funny when you Google image. I like to do a Google image on it, and like he told me this like years ago. We were like, I don't know, like 20 something, early 20s.
I'd love to hear his theory for why 18 as opposed to like 20 or 17. If it's like something, me trying to come up with possible theories so that I could like test them in my own head when I go away, is so each decade in general in behavior, and people do this with their own, like coming up to massive milestone birthdays, that sort of thing, they'll tend to make more big life decisions because the way that we're thinking, when it's a turn of a millennium or when it's a new decade, we put these new pressures on ourselves we don't usually put on ourselves at New Year's to a much more intense degree. And I wonder if having that 2 years off the 20, it's it's 2 times 9 more than it's 18. If that makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
This would be the first. This is me trying to like work out how this works. And there's something that's particularly appealing to that rhythm of nostalgia. So I'd be looking at nostalgia and 9s.
I think that's what.
I don't know.
That's what I was looking at as well. Like I was like, oh, okay, so when you're 18, what was this? And then like kind of that filters around there. But yeah,
this throwback culture is necessarily nostalgic.
Definitely, and it was huge, and I was like, "Oh wow!" And then I knew that I was meeting you, and you're big about trends and stuff. I was like, "I'm gonna see what you think." Yeah, I'm gonna see what you think. I was like, "But I think
it's interesting."
Yeah, and it's great, and I've kind of looked at that, and yeah, but it's a cool little one. But yeah, he's one of the coolest guys I know, and like, I'm always fascinated with how he predicts so many
try and
things.
Ask him to add, like most of this is probably non-linear, but try and ask him what aspects, because that'll help you layer cultural kind of possibility. So definitely nostalgia, definitely fashion, definitely kind of era kind of dependent. One interesting thing to throw at him could be each time a trend does come back, it tends to come back a little bit different.
Yeah.
So
he said that as well,
street culture was really relevant, and this would be part of what he's saying. Oh, sorry, hold on.
Is that you? Yeah, no, that's cool.
I turned it off.
Do what? Nah, that's fine. Not a problem. It is. We are human. It's a Toddcast.
It's all good. Toddcast.
Was that
it? Was that behind the Toddcast?
It's behind the Toddcast. Was that an alarm or is that a thing?
Yeah. It was an alarm to tell my partner to cook me food on my way home.
Don't get Uber Eats carbonara.
Yeah.
Did you want to put on silent just in case, or was that on silent?
It's on silent. That's why.
But it's the
expect
alarm
that it would do. So I better check that I actually turned it off.
That's all right. I'm not fussed, but it's just that just for you.
No, it'll annoy me too. It's not actually unnecessary.
Yeah.
No, I turned it off fully.
Not a problem.
There we go. So trends coming back differently each time. So this time fashion trends are coming, like there's so many different ones, but say we'll go roughly in, throwback culture, say the 90s, we're seeing it affect street more than it was before.
Yeah.
And that could be interesting for perhaps the cohort he's in. So what kind of generation we're saying? Pretty much millennial?
Yeah, he's a tad older than me. Yeah, so he's a millennial, but he's got some X. He's got some X qualities.
So for him, that grunge culture was really huge, which is a street culture.
Yeah, he was big for that. Yeah,
perhaps those are the layers kind of culture that he's tapped into, and that's why he's seeing those new trends emerge from that sort of space. But I definitely see. So I was doing some work in the subscription space recently, and essentially one of the really important parts of our work was looking at how subscription has changed over time. So, it used to be your kind of World Visions and that kind of idea was a subscription model, or, your newspaper, your annual subscription to like a magazine. Whereas now there's subscription boxes and there's, Netflix television, like what we subscribe to and how we subscribe is really different. And there's this thing called like analogous problem solving, which I really love, which is that like every problem has been solved structurally somewhere before. So can you kind of borrow that structure? And one thing, what was I going to say? One thing that I was thinking with subscriptions, so subscription boxes in particular, is that they're an evolved hamper. So hamper does most of the same things, but we weren't subscribed to it. So subscription and hampers kind of crossed over in their trends, and now we have this subscription box idea. So the subscription box has now superseded both of those things, and it's the evolved version. Okay. So you want to kind of think what could supersede your trend areas of focus in the future. So now we've got, say, 80s street fashion crossover, or like a 90s street grunge wear. What could be the next thing, the next time it comes around, what will be the thing that supersedes it? And it might be trends that we don't understand yet, or it might be trends that are relevant from the generation most likely to buy that product, which will probably be the, the 20s to 30s of that time. Definitely, so that'll be Gen Z. What's going to be their nostalgia throwback? Yeah.
Yeah, because we're getting that whole normcore as well. Like it's that Seinfeld buzz. Like it's that, we're in that period. And that was like when, that's kind of early 90s. It's
there's cultures layers kind of coming back.
Yeah, that late 90s, early 2000s. Because I always get confused with the early 90s, late 90s.
There's like a
early 90s
party. With the coming up to the new millennium. So it must be an early
is late
late
90s
90s and early.
And then
2000s.
if we go to my friend's theory, 2002 is the 18-year mark, right? So it's close, right? But yeah, so it's interesting. And then how can we it's great. But you asked me to ask him, like, how does he come up with that?
Yeah.
He's not consciously competent, but you are consciously competent. So I'm going to ask you, like, what are the elements you look at? It's probably a huge amount of elements, but what are the key things
I
do you
have
look
to
at?
navigate it, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do anything with the hugeness. So I am usually coming from the context of, there's two contexts I'm probably mostly coming to this with. One is total curiosity, where we're having some conversation, like today's conversation. I think I'm going to go tonight and look at what generation came up with the term Gen Alpha.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think the way they think of alpha could be interesting. I don't know. I don't know if I can find that. So just, being totally curious, and then therefore there's obvious parameters as a specific question that I'm kind of going for, and then I'm exploring the culture around that. Or the more common one is I'm working on a business challenge, in which case I'm looking at brand and customer and the cultures that those two subscribe to. And if I haven't developed the brand yet, I'm looking a lot at the customer and the business structure and where that competitive advantage lies. And I use that to build essentially the bet that I think would be the most valuable. Yeah. That kind of makes sense. And then, so look to the person you're solving the problem for. If it's yourself, what cultures are important to you, or what values are important to you. And then you can start researching your trends from there. Yeah. Where you research trends is going to depend on what you're researching. Like, I have so many different kind of trend funnels. An interesting one that I've been talking about lately is Sparks and Honey on Facebook. They're a massive trend group, and they have this video they release once a day that's the last 24 hours in culture, and they're all volatile trends. But if you're interested in actual trends, I think that's a cool place to start.
Sparks and Honey.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. I'm glad this is my podcast, because I can just listen to that a bit later. I won't forget. I won't have to write it down. That's interesting. Yeah. And it's just keeping your finger on the pulse and kind of working with that. Because one thing that I find about all this and everything we've discussed is absolutely fantastic. And I find that big brands do this really well. But it's because they have, one, a time, and two, budget to do this.
Big team.
What I like about what you do, it appears that you're giving smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses a chance at having an expert in their corner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And doing this. Is that right? Is that where you're at?
Because I think incredible ideas come from anywhere. And I think with niches in particular, small and medium-sized businesses. So I kind of work with up to, I have worked with large companies as well, but my love is working mostly with either side hustles or with the kind of up to 60 to 80, where they're at that turning point in their business where they're becoming a bigger business. What are they going to be? It's like the adolescence, I guess. Yeah. And I totally forgot the question.
Oh, well, where are you positioned? Because big brands do it really well. Oh, yeah. Smaller companies,
I totally remember.
Yeah.
Sorry. We're using my brain all day. We're recording a bit later on, and my brain kind of dies after a while.
Sorry.
No. It's just part of it. The smaller businesses can move faster. Yeah. If you think about it, so in competitive strategy, there's this idea of jujitsu, where you use your opponent's weight against them. And as a smaller business, you can move quickly, you can change quickly, you can enter small niches that they don't have the time or resources. You use the fact that they have to be so large and slow moving and rigmarole and getting the idea passed through 50 layers of innovation roadblocks. Small businesses don't have nearly as many innovation roadblocks. So we can often do crazy, exciting things. Maybe they get bought by a big business, whatever it is you want.
But what I will say, though, in my experience in managing and running a lot of small businesses, is that they're all started up on nowhere near enough capital as what they needed. Yeah. And
I know that feel.
And if they do have capital, generally, and this is a huge generalization, it's boomer capital, right?
Yeah.
So
it's about prioritization.
Yeah, but then I can imagine there's so many ways I want to utilize you in my day job in terms of what I do, and then I'm like, but how am I going to get this? How am I going to get the boomer capital? Because I have the answer to in terms of where that is. I'm like,
definitely.
How am I going to do that? And then they would see this as a task. It would be like, but we can just get you. You're great at ideas. That's why we pay you. Rather than getting
have to pitch a case,
a culture or an idea expert. Because I think And as I was what I was saying before, like I have a friend that's really cool and he's great. And when he goes into business, because he'll just be himself and they'll be on trend. But then, as I said, he's not consciously competent, where someone like yourself, like where you can go to, there's a service and you can go, oh, hey Mel, what do we do?
Yeah.
You know, where are we at? Or what are we looking at?
And those often how the questions are. It's like, I don't know, but someone told me to talk to you and here I am.
Yeah.
But it's my job to work out what to do and what to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, it's so interesting that, that there are these services available now, and I think it's becoming more and more.
And more we're going to see them, appear. Like there's so many different businesses, like consulting space, once again, because freelancing has been working really well, and consultants have gone, oh, well, like, designers were freelancing, social media managers are freelancing, marketing are freelancing, and consultant is a different business structure.
Yeah.
But consultants are realizing, oh, more and more than ever, I can go into this. And often it's a heart-centered thing to work with smaller businesses, because the difference that it makes to their lives is so much bigger, and it's so exciting. And there's so often the consultants that make that kind of pivot care more. Not all of them, I'm sure, but many of them do. So we're going to see more and more cool things popping up in consultancy. And it's definitely in your business. Like obviously I value strategy, but in your business it's about picking what pieces of the coin you can do well enough and what ones are missing. I have a video I put online with my methodology, and it's too long to listen to, but
it's never too long.
Too esoteric. But essentially, for the 4 aspects of my methodology, I have like a clue of if that's going wrong in your business, what that kind of looks like. So one of them is like spot fires. If your business is not competitively or structurally aligned to the promise it's delivering, or it doesn't understand what its customers' expectations are, call that like the fire festival thing. Yeah. But essentially you see spot fires. So, looking at your business and going, what are the challenges and what challenges don't I get, and trying to, whether you might not have to hire someone straight away, but try and work out what might help you, and it'll just take you closer and closer. But business, like you have to do that every day. There's always a new challenge. Definitely. I had that same experience. It doesn't end. You just have to enjoy that challenge of actually solving the problem and putting yourself out there and talking to different people, and you'll get there if you want to get there.
Yeah, cool. So one thing that I'm dying to ask is with my podcast, right? So one of the things that I've been wanting to do a podcast for years, and what I did was first I did a little bit of community radio stuff, and then so I did some community radio. But what I did was I absolutely threw myself into the deep end on community radio, and I didn't plan any of my shows, because what I wanted to learn was how to talk or how to fill in gaps when there's chaos. So
you're good at that.
Yeah. So, but I wanted to really, and so there was no better way than on live radio, right? So got into that. The only thing I had
in the deep end, EFP, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And like it was a safe bet, because how many people are going to listen to Northwest FM? Probably not a great deal.
And you're good at jumping in the deep end.
Yeah. So I was kind of like it was calculated that I wasn't going to make that much a fool of myself. The only thing I had planned was the music as.
Cool. Okay. Yeah.
As that was it, because I'm a big music head, so I've got a really eclectic taste. I have
a billion plans to bring into it.
Yeah, and then so I did the music. I planned some of the music, but then those gaps where I knew I had to make up content on the fly. So sometimes I found myself while the song was playing, googling like top 10 lists, maybe talk about some restaurants, do this, take some callers, people ring in, do whatever. So I got into that, and then when my dream was to do a podcast, and I said, I don't just want to do a podcast without knowing how to work on the fly. So then
that explains it so well.
Yeah. So then I got into that. So then I got into podcasting. But the first question everybody asks when I say I've got a podcast that's new, whatever, they go, "What's it about?" And I'm like, well, that's the thing. It's not about anything.
A Seinfeld of podcasts.
Yeah, but it's exactly. Each episode is its episode. And the guests themselves are the content.
So like when you were describing being in radio with the vision of podcasts and the goal of, the early challenge of wanting to work out how do I fill in those quiet spaces, it shows how every set of unique experiences and interests and ambitions leads you to look at situations and questions in a totally new way, and it leads you to draw out different type of information. So everyone asking you about the podcast is thinking from their like idea of podcasts
Yeah, exactly.
as someone who may or may not want to make one.
Yeah.
And then you're on the podcast side going, okay, no, I've got this vision. I'm interested in exploring and in an open format. But your podcast, by doing that and say being a first mover in that kind of space, for example, is you'll not only will you experience unknowns related to that you'll discover along the way, which will lead to new possibilities, but also your podcast will achieve things that other podcasts that are structured cannot. Yeah. Just by way of that structure. And so it's awesome. It's cool.
Where my question was going and what I was most worried about is that because everybody's asking that, am I going to be missing out by not niching down?
You're always missing out by niching as well. So every choice, every yes has a no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's just, once again, which bets you can change your mind and go back. You can change, you can pivot and you can explore, and maybe you'll try a structured episode for the fun of it, just to see if you like it, if you don't. Yeah. There's no good or bad. It's just which bets you want to place. Yeah. Which metrics are important to analyzing whether that bet or not is your kind of bet.
And the calculation I made, the only problem would be that it's just finding a loyal audience straight away. And obviously it's going to take it time to build this loyalty because it is so random. And I'll need to
who likes the Seinfeld of podcasts?
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Maybe that's your crossover space. They're the two trends I'm seeing colliding.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe it's not, who knows, but you'll find it. Like if you're looking and you're looking with this deliberateness, you will find it.
Yeah. And then the next question to that was like, okay, so you've answered that question for me. And then it was like, so what's going to be the best way for me to push that out into that realm?
So why do you think you might have wanted a podcast, or where do you kind of envisage that you could take it? Like say you won the lottery and you traveled, this is one of my questions.
Yeah, no, I like it.
You traveled all around the world doing whatever the hell you wanted to do.
Yeah.
You came back here. What would be the first, if you did, what would be the first worky thing that you did, perhaps something related to podcasting? What would that be?
100%. And this is why I'm doing it as well. I've asked myself the exact question. Yeah. And if I was to travel the world, I would travel the world learning, like having these conversations. So just a quick background to that. I dropped out of school in year 11. I'd like to, don't want to pump up my own tires. I see myself as a bright spark, like someone that's bright.
School ain't right for everyone.
Yeah, but structured learning sucked. I hated it. The best thing I loved about school was my mates. Yeah. The sporting aspect. I love playing sports, and also, I love the social stuff. And anything that we did that was discussion based, anything that we did was practical, I was all in on. But then anything that was like behavioral based. So like, all right, sit down and be quiet and copy this or do this, read chapter 3 and be quiet. Yeah. I'm like, come on, like that's torture for me. Like I've been running around outside all day or whatever the case is. And you're asking me to now sit there and be quiet. And I just can't do that. So that killed me. And then, so I dropped out of school early, and then I got into business. And then, as I was saying earlier, I got promoted to this level of, you okay?
Yeah, I've got like these super dry eyes.
Oh, okay.
Once they start watering, it's really hot in this room.
It is quite warm.
I've rubbed my makeup into my eyes.
Oh, no.
I'm having a drama, but this is fun. This is part of the Seinfeld of podcasting. So I'm just, for a visual image, I'm sitting here crying basically opposite Todd.
Well, there's no tears.
He's telling me his dreams.
There's no tears. But it's, I was like, at first I thought you were just scratching your eye, and then it got a little longer than that, and I was like, oh, okay.
And he's like, I've run out of like how long I can fill this gap for.
No, I could have continued talking, but my concern got greater than my need to fill the gap.
No, it's only last for a few seconds. I'm back now. Yeah.
Yeah.
This happens like once a day. For me, it's normal, but it's bizarre to explain it when you see it.
I'm glad I got to experience it.
It's a special gift for me to hear.
As I was saying, so I kind of worked out that wasn't for me. We're back, yeah.
Yeah. No,
I worked out that wasn't for me. I dropped out of school, and then when I got into business, I got promoted really quickly because I loved the random nature of business. I got into sales. And then I was lucky. I had some seniors that were fantastic, and I was actually become an assistant to some of those early on in my career. Yeah. And then I learnt off some really sharp sales guys. but I looked at those as like almost like sporting coaches because I come from a big sporting background.
And a lot of the best sales and BDMs, like business development managers, they have that kind of chutzpah, I guess, that you do as well. And it's that unstructured, but go with the flow and build it as you go organically, which I think is awesome. Yeah.
And then, so then that developed, and then I was like, all right, cool. Now getting back to podcasting is what I found the best method of learning for me was having discussions, talking, and applying whatever it is. So then like going, and then your question was, if I won the lotto and I did my travel or whatever, what would I do?
Keep learning.
It'd be learning, right? And I found that like tonight, I wouldn't know some of the things I've known now unless I had this conversation with you, and I can't continue to replicate that model of learning. Like I can't just walk into a behavioral science lab and be like, oh, hey, teach me everything you know.
Well, what you can do is find all the people, of which there are many, I'm one of them, who love learning this way. Yeah. And perhaps push the branding of the podcast or the direction of the podcast. This is just being, broad, towards being about learning based on immersion. And discussions with interesting people. So there's a magazine I love called Dumbo Feather. Okay. And whilst they have other cultures that they're a part of, essentially especially the very beginning of this magazine, it was one magazine a quarter, and they would interview 5 really interesting people, and that was it. Yeah. And now they've got art and sort of extra stages with it, but I can really see that idea of just being immersed in something interesting, a conversation you won't. It's nearly like TED Talk Ideas Worth Spreading, or definitely. Pause Festival in Melbourne, a big tech fest. It's kind of like the South by Southwest that just happened, Australia. Right? Just happened. It's an awesome one. I love it. Is things you can't find on Google. And so there's kind of these ideas of being immersed in learning and knowledge, and perhaps that informs part of your future competitive advantage.
And then on the flip side of that, like my first
shoe polisher.
And then on the flip side of that, my first episode where I was talking to Hayden, someone who I knew, and we we're talking about glow sticks and raving and this and that. and I want that as well. So that's why I was like to put in that whole strategy together, and I was kind of like, all right, what's the characters in that? Where does it go?
Well, people aren't just a job role. That's what I love about your podcast specifically is like, I'm not just a business designer. I'm not just all of the other things that I do in my life. I'm not just a friend, et cetera, et cetera. We're all lots of pieces. And I feel like a podcast like this can capture it in a way a structured podcast never could. Yeah. And it's, looking for that. Yeah. Okay. No, you got something. It's just following it and articulating and asking people, just like you have now about it. Do an empathy map around, why unstructured? What are the values? Who else does that? And that idea of like analogous problem solving again. So your TEDs, your Pause Fest, they're all solving this problem with different structures. Okay. Your structure is podcasts, but where could it go from there? Yeah. Cool. All right, so I'm in the right path. Oh, absolutely. For what I want to achieve. So, and you're following your gut. You already know. I think you're in the right path as well. It's just,
I hope so.
Which best to place next.
I hope so. I've spent a bit of money on it to get it started, but it's all fun and games. Awesome. And the attitude that I'm taking into it, to be completely honest, is the hobby for now. If this turns into
a sick hobby,
exactly. If this turns into any form of income, I'd be super, super grateful, and I think that'd be amazing. And I'm not aiming for that at all.
Monetization, as long as you've got it in the back of your mind, if you think, I'd like to do this full time, because monetization gives you a pathway that you can put more of yourself into something you love. So don't forget about it, because it could be your pathway to perhaps this is a full time thing quicker than you expected. But just keep it in your mind as one of the things that you're testing and exploring, and maybe you throw it out there. Maybe don't be like completely chaotic with it, but. At the end of the day, you're always going to explore the ideas and strategies you're going to try and choose, the bets you're going to choose to take are always going to be based on your strengths and what you like anyway. And that's that same idea of like the tarot kind of coming full circle. Yeah. Is that idea of pattern recognition. You'll choose the bet that is the right pattern for you. Yeah. Interesting. Look, I guess we'll begin to wrap it up, but there was one more thing that I wanted to ask you actually. I love it. You did a podcast recently, and it wasn't released. It was with someone who was a tarot reader. Did I get that right? She was like in the car, and she was like talking about, I had a podcast. That is Christy Gray. Yeah. And she's an astrologer. Sorry. Yeah, we did this crazy. So I wanted to get my astrology read, because I don't know, I'm not in a situation where I can know my time of birth. And so I was really interested in just exploring that whole world.
Yeah.
As you've heard from a bit of my background. And we got chatting, and now she's become a customer of mine, and we're kind of going back and forth with, we did it as like a astrology and then went straight into the podcast. We had a sort of a half structure, I guess, for it, like territories we definitely wanted to explore. Yeah. Just to see where it went. It was really intense but fun.
Yeah. And I was going to ask your stance on that, and I think you alluded to it earlier in terms of your childhood upbringing.
Yeah.
That you're kind of really open-minded to that, which is, to me, it's funny because I see you as such a logical, a logical person, and then it's only a perception, right?
So where does this fit in?
Yeah, but it's only a perception that's not logical. Like, it's got some merit to it.
It's definitely got logic in it because it's me. So I'm the INTJ, which is like the archetype of, doing the potato, archetype of evil villain. So evil villains in TV series that are, making schemes, like Mr. Burns, and I think Palpatine is meant to be an INTJ as well. Basically, everything has rationality. Like, there's nothing that I do that isn't deliberate and thought about, often at intense length. Where these ideas of different perspectives come into it is that I have an ability to wear nearly any perspective on for size. Like, as another like whole person interest, I spend a lot of time just purely nourishing my curiosity on like the fringest edges of the internet. I have like this random other website. If anyone hears this, just DM me. I can send it to you. It is not safe for work. Of like things I've collected that I found online that I love. And I can entertain things that other people would find disgusting, maybe sick. I got called depraved by my last boss in an organized job. Yeah. And a feeder, I think he called me. And I think there's with models, they're all someone's way of understanding and clarifying something. And astrology is no different. It's a human's perspective of something. And it's trying to make bets about the future, strategy, and, through its particular lens. And I'm interested in understanding it and understanding myself in the reflection of a model, or my business in the reflection of a model. And with analogous problem solving, I look at mimicry in nature, like biomimicry. I look at absolutely anything at all. And so I pretty much anything that I don't feel that I know well, I'm curious about. And so, there's no reason that you can't approach anything from a logical perspective. And actually, Christy is super logical as well. She's both logical and also creative and spiritual, and brings those things together. And so I think that's why we were a really good match as well, because her whole thing is looking at it from a self, helping you help yourself. She's a ENFJ. Yep. That kind of perspective as well. So just kind of see how it fits in for you.
Yeah. Because I'll be honest, growing up, my mother and my sister were big into it. Like, my sister's got all the books and the birth book and this and that and all those things, those wonderful things. Yeah, and I grew up a skeptic, and then it wasn't till a couple of years ago I met someone and they got me onto a YouTube channel called Northeast Tarot. And they would do like astrology based tarot readings, so like based on your your star sign or whatever, and
so that multiple people could benefit.
Yeah. So then each week she'll do a weekly reading, and then they'll do a monthly, and so forth, right? And for me, it got scarily accurate. Like there were some huge calls, and
that's the pattern. It's your pattern recognition, ENFP self, seeing the patterns that are relevant to you. Yeah, and that's in everything in life.
And so much so that I would watch, I don't tune in every week religiously, but I would tune in and I would watch it. And then, or sometimes what I'd like to do, I'll be like, I'm going to test this. I'm going to watch the old week. So like, I'm going to watch the week that just happened and I'm going to see how right you were.
Yeah.
And dead set, I've sat there and I've gone, no way. It's a little bit
freaky, isn't it?
Like, I've gone, how is this possible? And then you kind of break it down and you're like, oh, well, they kind of just use general terms or general things. But these things are big.
Like, why is this? Why is that resonating with so many of your cultures? That's kind of the question, I guess.
And they were calling things like, in your relationships, there will be a triangle, there'll be 3 people that'll be involved. Like this, I'm like,
it gets oddly specific, right?
That's beyond general. Like,
I had this challenging confrontation with like an old friend really recently, and we all approach these situations in many different ways with our own layers and what's happening in our own lives. But the next day it was like I got this little quote from an app called CoStar, which is like an astrology app. I like it because it gives me like a essentially like an affirmation for the day or like a focus for the day. And some of the time I'm just like whatever. And then other times, like this time, I was like, whoa,
that's hitting different.
it was like people that when people play power games with you, they're setting the rules of engagement, and I was like, it's irrelevant. And that's why I engage with this app, is because for me, when I have those moments, it's helped me, and I would rather the help than not the help. And it's understanding what it is for you as well.
It's amazing how it works. And I'm too much of that person that I can't, like, I'd rather sit on the side to go, I can't prove that it's not real, so I'm going to believe it.
And it's it's like the Bayesian logic again. Although like whether it's being open until evidence points in a direction how you define evidence and what you're looking to get out of things. And it's there's no correct way to do it and no incorrect way to do it. Where at the end of the day, like, this is super nihilist, but that's me. From we're weird blobs floating on a big blob in the middle of who knows what. Like, are any of our models correct? Any of them at all? Even the ones that refute other models. Like, what can we know? So for me, it's just, what do I enjoy? I'm here to be as curious as possible. I'm really pushing that boundary. And, what have I found useful for me? And like spiritually, one of the things I found that I really brought from my upbringing, aside from the kind of the fortune teller strategy aspect, is natural cycles. I'm really interested in how vegetables change over the year, and how plants do, and how weather does, and how that can fit into your life. And like we all just take what we like from the world. I think that's definitely fine. Cherry pick what you like.
Love it, absolutely love it. And I could talk to you for another 2 hours.
We
easily.
have like so much.
Easily.
We share in our Myers-Briggs our intuition, that pattern recognition function, as a dominant function.
But I think we should call it on this one. But I want you to come back for a follow-up episode and have more of a chat. And maybe if you could, I don't know, if you want to introduce other people, that'd be fantastic as well.
For sure.
Definitely. And I think I'm just talking to
someone
you as well.
in my life I wouldn't bring in for a conversation. Everyone 100%. Has something to share.
Amen. And also as well, I think in terms of your business, it's the best time to give it a plug. Like, if there's people sitting out here listening and going, you know what, I need to, I don't know, you tell me, like, if there's someone sitting out there.
Well, you already know if
questions.
You're excited by now, especially if you're still listening. But if this has been really resonating with you and you're jazzed and you're here with us, my Instagram is the easiest way to find me. I do everything connected to my business. So it's like Bonbo, BONBOAU. You can find me there, and there's all kinds of resources, and just get involved.
It is great. Your Instagram page is great. I did sign up for your free.
The emails.
Yep.
So you get 2. It says 1 strategy technique, but there's 2.
Yeah.
That's just me. And you get to try them out for your business, and it's really awesome. And you can literally just reply to the email. I'm on the other end. It's not a no reply or anything like that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mel. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me on here. I called you out random because I was like, you're starting a podcast. I'm interested.
Exactly. Exactly. But thank you very much for tuning into the Toddcast. Please like this episode, subscribe, share, do all those wonderful things. And